All right, we're going to get started. We want to honor everyone's time. First, we want to say thank you so much for joining us. This is a webinar on understanding dyslexia. My name is Germay Alizar. I am the Director of Student Services here at Washington Township. I am very excited for this webinar on understanding dyslexia, as there has been many questions about dyslexia lately and over the last several years. So I'm very excited to join Natalie, and I will do a quick introduction here very soon. But before I get started, I want to say thank you to Dr. Erica Buchanan-Rivera. She has started this webinar series and has been very successful. So I just want to say thank you to her for taking leadership and providing great opportunity for our families and community to participate in this webinar. And this webinar will be recorded, as well as right now it's live, obviously, and share with our community. So if you missed it, we will share this webinar with our community and families around Washington Township. Without further ado, I will introduce you to our awesome educator, Natalie Manley-Fadre, and she will do a quick introduction of herself. Welcome, Natalie. We're excited to learn more from you about understanding dyslexia.
Perfect. I am Natalie Manley-Fadre, and I have been a teacher, a special education teacher at Crooked Creek Elementary School here in Washington Township. I'm finishing up my 19th year. Doesn't seem quite real. But then I've also been the dyslexia coach in the district since 2018, when the dyslexia legislature enrolled in the Act 217. So been doing this role for a little while now, but just now getting through the levels of the screeners. So I'm excited to share that with you guys this evening.
Well, thank you so much. We're excited. So I just want to let you know, our participant, again, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, most likely Natalie is going to cover it. She has an awesome presentation for us here. But if you have any questions, go ahead and use the Q&A tab on the bottom of your computer or tablet, and go ahead and just write your questions there. And then myself and Andrea will do our best to answer those questions. We would leave about 10 minutes or so at the end to answer any questions our participant have. So yeah, use that Q&A to put any questions you have. All right, thank you. So Natalie, it is all yours.
Did you know that dyslexia affects 1 in 5 people and exists on a spectrum, impacting people differently? Thank you for coming tonight as we dig into dyslexia together. We will be covering some background information on dyslexia, including Act 217 that was signed into legislation in 2018. We will also be covering some of the risk factors associated with dyslexia for different age groups. Additionally, we'll talk about the screening process, which Washington Township uses with guidance from the Indiana Department of Education, or the IDOE. And lastly, but with great significance, we will be discussing some supportive strategies that we can use in the classroom, as well as supportive strategies you can use at home to support your child. I'd like to share a quick TED Ed clip with you by Kelly Sandman Hurley. It gives some valuable information about how the dyslexic brain functions.
Take a moment to read the following. How was that? Frustrating? Slow? What were those sentences about? They're actually a simulation of the experience of dyslexia, designed to make you decode each word. Those with dyslexia experience that laborious pace every time they read. When most people think of dyslexia, they think of seeing letters and words backwards, like seeing B as D and vice versa. Or they might think people with dyslexia see saw as was. The truth is, people with dyslexia see things the same way as everyone else. Dyslexia is caused by a phonological processing problem, meaning people affected by it have trouble not with seeing language, but with manipulating it. For example, if you heard the word cat and then someone asked you, remove the C, What word would you have left? At. This can be difficult for those with dyslexia. Given a word in isolation like fantastic, students with dyslexia need to break the word into parts to read it. Fan-tas-tic. Time spent decoding makes it hard to keep up with peers and gain sufficient comprehension. Spelling words phonetically like STIK for stick and FRENS for friends is also common. These difficulties are more widespread and varied than commonly imagined. Dyslexia affects up to 1 in 5 people. It occurs on a continuum. One person might have mild dyslexia, while the next person has a profound case of it. Dyslexia also runs in families. It's common to see one family member who has trouble spelling, while another family member has severe difficulty decoding even one-syllable words like catch. The continuum and distribution of dyslexia suggest a broader principle to bear in mind as we look at how the brains of those with dyslexia process language. Neurodiversity is the idea that because all our brains show differences in structure and function, we shouldn't be so quick to label every deviation from the norm as a pathological disorder or dismiss people living with these variations as defective. People with neurobiological variations like dyslexia, including such creative and inventive individuals as Picasso, Muhammad Ali, Whoopi Goldberg, Steven Spielberg, and Cher, clearly have every capacity to be brilliant and successful in life. So here's the special way the brains of those with dyslexia work. The brain is divided into 2 hemispheres. The left hemisphere is generally in charge of language and ultimately reading, while the right typically handles spatial activities. fMRI studies have found that the brains of those with dyslexia rely more on the right hemisphere and frontal lobe than the brains of those without it. This means when they read a word, it takes a longer trip through their brain and can get delayed in the frontal lobe. Because of this neurobiological glitch, they read with more difficulty. But those with dyslexia can physically change their brain and improve their reading with an intensive multisensory intervention that breaks the language down and teaches the reader to decode based on syllable types and spelling rules. The brains of those with dyslexia begin using the left hemisphere more efficiently while reading, and their reading improves. The intervention works because it locates dyslexia appropriately as a functional variation in the brain, which naturally shows all sorts of variations from one person to another. Neurodiversity emphasizes this spectrum of brain function in all humans and suggests that to better understand the perspectives of those around us, we should try to not only see the world through their eyes, but understand it through their brains.
All right. So when I watched this video some time ago, I remembered having some aha moments as I realized why some of the processing speeds would be slowed down in a dyslexic brain as opposed to a typical brain, as the paths of information had to travel in the brain in a much more complex way than a typical brain. So hopefully as you watched it, maybe you picked up some new information about dyslexia or had a couple aha moments that you can connect with as I go through the presentation. With the information that we already know about dyslexia and how it impacts learning, Indiana legislators created State Enrolled Act 217 and mandated that all accredited private and public schools use a screening process to identify students with characteristic traits of dyslexia at a young age so that we could intervene as soon as possible with systematic, explicit, sequential, and multisensory instructional approaches. As you can imagine, the risk factors are different among different age groups. It is important to point out that some of the concerns that you may have could be developmental and not related to dyslexia. So let's go by age group. Common risk factors for students with characteristics of dyslexia in kindergarten and first grade often include having trouble with being able to rhyme words or identify when words are spoken to them and ask if they rhyme or not. It could also be a challenge for students in kindergarten and first grade to manipulate sounds within words. So for example, if I said, "Can you tell me the sounds that you hear in cat?" Or if I removed the sound in the word hat, what would your new word be? Another challenge that we see is with identifying upper and lowercase letters, as well as being able to say the sounds that represent those letters. Sight words at a beginning level are also difficult, like a, the, and, me. Spelling words by sound so they are at least recognizable also is often an issue. At the second and third grade level, some of the common risk factors for students with characteristics of dyslexia have trouble with recognizing common sight words, the ability to blend or decode words together when reading, the knowledge of patterns of sounds, or the ability to apply it in different words as they read or write. We also see challenges with omitting letters and spelling, even from words that you can distinctively identify or hear the sounds in, and also the ability to read fluently with accuracy, a smooth pace, and expression is difficult. In the upper elementary school, many of the same challenges we've already discussed in some of the younger students are still prevalent in the upper elementary grades as well. Reading aloud in front of peers can cause fear, worry, and anxiety. Being asked to read for a time test is also difficult. Students with dyslexic characteristics often do not like to read for pleasure. They might have a limited vocabulary, and spelling is again an area of weakness. In middle school and high school, some of the problematic areas could include being able to read at a quick, smooth rate, being able to complete timed tasks, particularly again in reading. And something that's really important in middle school and high school is being able to take notes, managing time, and being organized, which are essential, but can still be difficult for these students. So now that we've talked about some of the risk factors associated with dyslexia, let's discuss the screening process. We'll start by going over the domains we screen for, which have been specified by House Bill 217. The first area is alphabet knowledge. That is screening upper and lowercase letters in a random order. We move on to sound and symbol recognition, where we're asking students to individually identify letter sounds and letter combination sounds, like ch, sh, w, and even k. The third area that we screen for is decoding. Decoding is blending letter sounds and letter combinations while reading, or chunking words into smaller parts to help you read fluently. Phonological awareness focuses on words as a whole. We want to know if a child is able to decipher a word within a sentence, or can a child identify the syllables within a word. It also includes skills such as rhyming. Phonemic awareness is the manipulation of sounds within words. So being able to pull apart individual sounds from words, like the word mop, it has the sounds ah, p. Or if we asked a student to blend the sounds together. So if I said d, ah, g, the student would know that the word is dog. It could include changing the sounds to make a new word altogether. So if you take the b sound off of bat and add a k sound at the beginning, what would your new word be? Another example would be to identify another word with the same beginning sound or ending sound. Rapid naming is screening the processing speed with rapid naming of colors or shapes. So we're wanting students to see and quickly recall known information. The last one is encoding. Encoding consists of grade level spelling words and looks at the ability to write sounds within words accurately. It also gives us the opportunity to note letter reversals. So since I've shared the areas we assess, let's take a look at an overview of the screening process as a whole. The universal screener is given to all kindergarten and second grade students, kindergarten first and second grade students in Washington Township. The scores from those screeners will be accessible on Skyward after they are given. The students that showed areas of deficit are flagged and a level 1 screener is recommended. With parent permission, the level 1 screener will be given. The data is compiled and then entered into Skyward. A student will only bring home a letter if there are concerns. After giving the level 1 screener, the students that have 5 or more areas of deficit will be taken to the next step. The parents or guardians will be invited to attend a response to instruction or intervention meeting, also referred to as an RTII meeting, with the school team. At the team meeting, the results are discussed and interventions are also discussed. The decision is made as to which would be most appropriate to address the areas of concern. The intervention is then implemented, and after a set number of weeks, the level 1 screener will be given again to assess for progress. The RTII team will reconvene and then discuss the results, the progress, and the next steps. So since we've given a chance to look at the overview, let's look at each step individually. The initial screener is the universal screener. It is given to all kindergarten, first, and second grade students, regardless of how they did the previous year. There are a few students that are exempt. Those would include students in life skills classrooms, students with an IEP where that decision was made in the case conference, students with a language level of a 1.0 to a 1.9 on their WIDA assessment, a student that has already been identified as having dyslexia, or at the written request of a parent. All of the domains are assessed. The assessment that Washington Township is giving for the universal screener is through NWEA. Each domain we discussed earlier is assessed, the data is compiled, and then it's entered into Skyward. NWEA uses a formula to identify students that are at risk for having dyslexic characteristics. For any student identified or often referred to as flagged, a letter is sent home to the parents or guardians requesting permission to further assess those domains to see if they continue to show deficits. With the level 1 screener, it can only be given with parent permission. It is additional testing, giving us another piece of data to analyze and to determine if interventions are truly needed. For this screener, Washington Township has chosen off of the approved IDOE list to use the Next Steps in Guided Reading Assessment Kit, the Arkansas Rapid Naming, and the Word Knowledge Inventory. Upon completion of giving the level 1 screener, and once the data is compiled, it's communicated via Skyward, and parents and guardians of students flagged with 5 or more areas of deficit on the level 1 screener are invited to attend a response to instruction and intervention meeting with the school to discuss the next steps moving forward. For a student that's already receiving special education services, a meeting will be held to ensure their current services in their IEP are addressing their needs. An RTII team meeting typically consists of an administrator, the literacy coach, the general education teacher, the special education teacher, the school psychologist, and the parent or guardian. The classroom data, the universal data, and the level 1 data is discussed, and an intervention plan is created. Interventions had to be approved by the IDOE. Additional accommodations will be also will be shared and determined if they might be beneficial for the child in the classroom. The interventions on Washington Township's list did not have to be a specific intervention per the Indiana Dyslexia Screening and Intervention Act, but they did have to fit the following criteria. They had to be explicit and direct. They had to be systematic and sequential. they had to build upon the skills that the student already knows. They had to be cumulative, individualized, and take a multisensory approach. One example of a multisensory approach is to teach a student to use their hands to be able to sound out words. So for example, if I said the word dog and I wanted the student to sound it out, I might tap it on my arm and say dog, dog. Or if I wanted to teach a new word, I might have the student use their finger to skywrite the word as they say each letter. These interventions can take place in a variety of settings. For students that are in grades 3 and beyond, they will participate in the universal screener if a classroom teacher identifies that the student struggles with all of those skills. These interventions will be given with fidelity and have to be given for the company recommended timeframe in order to show progress. Once the interventions are given, the level 1 screener is given again. After implementing the screener, then we will see if there are areas of growth, at which time the RTII team will reconvene to discuss the results of that screener and what the next steps will be. The next steps could vary depending on each student. If a student has made growth and is no longer at risk or at some risk, meaning that they have less than 5 areas of deficit, then the student no longer will participate in the intervention. If some growth is made and there are now fewer deficits based on the level 1 screener, then the student will continue with the interventions and accommodations. The team may also decide to implement a different intervention. And then at the end of that intervention timeframe, the level 1 screener will be given again for the deficit areas from before, and the RTII team will reconvene again to discuss next steps. The third option is that a student has not made growth in the deficit areas at all, or they have more areas of deficit. At that point, an intervention would continue and a level 2 screener would be recommended. The level 2 screener is the final step that we're going to discuss in the process tonight. The level 2 screener is the request for special education testing and is only able to be given with parental consent. The evaluation given at this point is more individualized and is assessing for a specific learning disability. This is completed by a school psychologist on a 20-day timeline. Once the evaluation is completed, a case conference is held with the parent or guardian and the school team. The school team consists of a school administrator, a school psychologist, the general education teacher, the special education teacher, and possibly with the speech and language pathologist and or the reading specialist. As I mentioned a minute ago, for students in grades 3 and beyond, they will participate in the universal screener only if the classroom teacher identifies that the student struggles with all of the following domains: alphabet knowledge, sound symbol recognition, phonological and phonemic awareness, decoding, rapid naming, and encoding. The other way that a student beyond 3rd grade can be assessed is at the request of a parent. The school will review the child's data and determine if that screener should be given. I am aware I am likely overwhelming you with information this evening. However, I think it's important to share supportive strategies that can be utilized at school, and of course, some strategies that you can use at home to support your child. I will begin with the school strategies. Having a positive environment is one of the most important things that we can do for students. Offering worksheets with contrasting colors besides black and white is also helpful. Using colored paper or even writing our words in different colors is supportive. Giving continuous feedback and not forcing students to read aloud will help them to be less anxious. You can also give them the chance to know ahead of time what they're going to be reading. Giving additional examples or highlighting essential information helps it to stand out and helps them to remember that information. It's also important to give wait time so that the student is able to process information being shared with them or directions and questions being asked of them. Combining verbal and visual information would also be helpful, or simplifying written directions. Again, as I mentioned before, a multisensory approach is often very, very helpful for students that have dyslexia or characteristics of dyslexia. And now for some strategies that you can use at home. Again, that positive, encouraging environment will help your student to succeed more easily. Ask open-ended questions when you're reading with your child. Give them the opportunity to answer more than one-word answer questions. Break assignments into smaller parts, or if it's a task that takes several days, break it up into smaller parts to make it more manageable. Foster the learning of new vocabulary. You could teach a new word of the day, or you could give your child a notebook to write new words that they've learned throughout the day or when they're reading. Let your child teach you. Let your child be the teacher so that they can explain things to you. Help your child be prepared and ready for the next day. Read creatively. Let your child read recipes, a toy catalog, magazines, billboards. It doesn't matter as long as they're reading. And one of the most important things that we can do is read in front of our children. As we know, having a supportive home and school partnership makes the world of difference. I found this quote by Henry Ford to be relevant to our partnership. Coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. As you digest this information, if you have specific questions, or if I wasn't able to answer any of your questions, some of your questions tonight, please feel free to call or email me. Email is probably the best way to reach me. However, my number is listed as well. If you believe that your child has a disability, you may request an educational evaluation at any time to determine his or her eligibility for special education and related services. You will need to contact your building administrator or your child's teacher if you would like to request this educational evaluation. Thank you for joining me, and I will answer some questions now.
Thank you so much, Natalie. That was great. I know there was a lot of information for our participant here, and we will answer any questions you have here in the next 20, 30 minutes we have here. So go ahead and feel free to type in any questions you have. In the meantime, I will just ask a few of the most common questions or frequently asked questions to Natalie, and she can help us answer some questions. Hopefully this will answer some of the questions our families have too. I think the most common question that we run into from most families is that the assessment piece, that we use an assessment to screen students. I know this is required by the state, and a lot of times, it's not just one test. I know some kids will be screened and they'll be identified as possibly for dyslexia. This does not mean, obviously, they have dyslexia. The big question is, tell us a little bit about the test, specifically for our little ones. When they're kindergarten, they're taking this, on a computer. Do they even understand, what they're doing in terms of like, hey, this is a big deal. We're screening for dyslexia. I know some kids understand it, some kids don't. So tell us a little bit about the testing all the way from the little ones to the oldest kiddos.
Sure. So it's actually the same process for all students, whether they're in kindergarten or if we're testing a high schooler. It's still the same process for the universal screener. We give it on the computer. So the computerized version, yeah, of course, there's going to be some kids that struggle with that. But as the time goes on and kids know technology better, we're seeing that it's easier for them to manipulate and get around on the screens. But those kiddos that struggle, those students may be flagged as need or being at risk potentially. And so that's why it's important for us to give that level 1 screener, because the level 1 screeners are not given on the computer. So that gives us an opportunity to work with students one-on-one and really see what they know. It's quick snippets, but it also gives us valuable information. So we're able to compare, as opposed to just having the NWEA that's done on the computer. We're able to have both of those assessments to determine whether a student might be at risk.
Got it. Thank
so
you.
In giving the assessment, the NWEA is typically given in one setting, but with the level 1 screeners, those can be given in multiple settings. So, as we're giving those screeners, they're very quick, but it can be daunting to sit down and have to take several of them. So we're able to split them up however we need to in order to not overwhelm a student when we're giving those assessments.
Correct. And then again, it's a one test, right? I mean, we have other tests that we can look into to see if a child has other struggles too. So thank you. Now we have some questions here, and hopefully this question we can answer. It says that my child writes. It sounds like the parent can understand the writing, but the teacher can't. So I don't know if the question is, can you help me with that, or it doesn't say if you can explain that, but it just says my child writes, or I can understand it, but his teacher can't understand it. Any advice for that parent?
Well, I think that for me, I would want to know a little bit more information, like what's the grade level? What, is it just because you've seen that writing and you know that a specific letter or blend of letters means something to that child? But I would also encourage you with your child to sit down and, as the child's writing it, have the alphabet in front of them and look for those sounds and point out some of those sounds as they're writing. So I don't know if it's a handwriting thing or if it's just that the letters are not phonetically making the words, but I would encourage you to have some visuals and then also point out those sounds as you're reading or as you're writing them or as they're writing them, or have your child write it and then write the word underneath it and point out those sounds, helping your child to blend and decode those words. So the writing and the reading are definitely paired together, as we know. So as a student learns to read more fluently, a lot of times the writing becomes more fluent as well. So those would be a couple things that I would work on, or even like as you're reading, pointing out some of the words and discussing the sounds that you see or the patterns that you see in those words.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, keep the questions coming. So we have another one. The question is that how common is it for the screener test that we give to kids in kindergarten to all the way to second grade to possibly miss kids with issues? So kids, I'm assuming missing means like if they have dyslexia, is there a chance that the test screening misses some kids? Is the question, I believe.
Well, of course, we always have the opportunity to miss kids, but I would say that the screener, especially the initial screener that we give, the universal screener, it's more sensitive than not. So when we give the universal screener, we found that this year in particular, the universal screener captured way more kids than we have in the past. So I feel like it's a little ultra sensitive in some ways, but of course there's going to be those kids it doesn't get caught. However, we're looking on the initial screener, the NWEA looks for students with a formula that they use to determine which students are struggling. The students that go to a level 1 screener, we're looking at making sure that they have multiple areas of deficit. So we know that with dyslexia, it's not just 1 or 2 areas. It is many of the different domains that we went through. So in order for a student, are we catching them or not catching them? I suppose, yes, there could be some that we don't see. But if I am looking at every one of those domains, we should see errors in all of those domains or most all of those domains so that we're able to identify them. So I feel like right now we have a pretty good process in place that the state has set up and said, hey, here's what we want you to do. And then Washington Township filled in some of those blanks as to what we are able to assess with and making sure that the interventions that we have in place do address it. I also think that since we have to assess in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, if a student is missed, perhaps in first grade or kindergarten, we still have every year to catch those kiddos to see if we're seeing multiple areas of deficit.
Yeah. Another big question that comes up, and keep the questions coming. Another question that comes up consistently is, we talk about intervention. I know a lot of families understand the intervention that we have in place once we identify kids that struggle, either because they missed school or maybe they haven't have the reading materials that they need. There's a lot of reasons why maybe a child is not reading at the grade level. So we talk about intervention a lot. And so if you want to explain it to parents, when we talk about intervention, if we identify a child that struggles with reading, and let's say they are maybe a year behind or 2 years behind their peers, just quick summary of like, what does the intervention look like, and how long do we usually put those intervention in place? And from your experience, do you see kids, some kids or more kids grow from that intervention and improve their scores or their reading ability?
Definitely. Thank you for bringing this one up, because I think this is really important and it's a big, big, big part of my job. So interventions are given to students who maybe need an additional dose of reading or math, but in particular, what we're looking at is the reading component. And so the intervention is separate from the general education instruction. I know in some schools they call it WIN, some schools they call it focus, but it would be an additional time during their day to get reading instruction at their level. So it's starting to fill in some of those gaps. And in particular with the dyslexia interventions, which are also commonly used for other interventions, it is very specific to what that student needs. So when we have those RTII meetings, we're looking at what were the areas of deficits, what were the programs that would align with that. So we have a list of interventions available in Washington Township that do meet all of the criteria that we're going to look and say, okay, my child has issues with this, this, and this. This would be a good program to use to really focus in on those areas that my student has deficits in. Typically, every intervention is different. Some of them say that we should be doing it 3 times a week for 40 minutes. Some say that we should do it 5 days a week for 40 minutes. Depending on what that intervention recommends is how long we're going to do. Now, let's be real. We know with COVID and it's the end of the year, that kind of stuff, there's going to be days that we miss, or we're doing iLearn, or we're doing some additional screening of things. So there's going to be days. So what we have talked about this year and going into next year, of course, is that those interventions, if we're saying that they need to do it for 5 weeks, or if that's what the intervention company is recommending, we're going to look at doing it for 35 days fidelity and with documentation. So we want to be able to document that, yes, I saw Johnny on this day, this amount of time, and this is the skills that we worked on. So that way we're not just saying, oh, but we met for our 5 weeks, but really we only saw him a couple days a week. So we really want to focus on the amount of days and make sure that it's being given consistently. So again, it's separate from the gen ed classroom. It doesn't provide grades. It's solely individualizing and working on those skills that those students need to improve on. So there's almost always a writing component. So we're working on spelling, and we're working on sounds, and we're working on blending. And then of course, depending on which program is chosen, it could be that we're teaching the individual sounds, or it's a student who's really struggling with fluency. It may be that we're further along, but we're trying to teach the student how to read fluently and with expression and with accuracy. So it just depends on where the student is in their deficits, but the whole goal is to get them to be closer to grade level and not have those gaps. Have I seen growth with interventions? 100% yes. I have students who surpass and catch up. And those students that I'm speaking of specifically right now are students that do have an individualized education plan and are in specific and have specific learning disabilities. But yes, students who have dyslexia, just as the video was showing us, or if students have a learning disability of some sort, yes, they can still use those interventions to attack those areas that they don't know and to get them up to speed.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you so much for that answer. That intervention question is always that comes up, and a lot of times our families are not clear with it. So it sounds like, yes, there is intervention in place and there is a timeline for it. And parents just need to ask, the teacher or administrator what what intervention is in place and how long we've been doing it, and is my child showing progress? If the child is not showing progress, so we obviously go to the next tier. Can you say a little bit more about, so let's say a child is showing very little progress, and so which means, it doesn't mean now the child has a disability, right? It means to intensify our intervention. Can you quickly share with us what the next intervention is for a child that maybe showing a little bit progress?
So each student would be looked at individually. So when we have those response to instruction and intervention meetings, whether it's right after the level 1 screener or after we have given the interventions and we're reviewing the data, those students, we are going to look specifically at where is their growth. Is this intervention truly hitting on the areas that they have deficits in? If it's not, but we're seeing some growth, we know that we're hitting some of those areas, we may potentially look at adding in additional days, may look at adding in extra time. Maybe the group is too big, or maybe that student isn't responding well to the teacher or the assistant that's giving that instruction. Maybe we need to approach it in a different way. The other option is choosing a different intervention. So as a team with the parent involved, we make that decision all together. So I'm not going to come to a meeting and say, this is what we're doing. It's going to be something where we look at, okay, this is your child. We know that they're a whole child. They're not a test. So let's look at everything. How are they doing in class? How are they doing on assessments? What do you notice at home? What things do you see? And then we create a plan together. So the intervention list that we have that's been given to us with guidance from the DOE, we use that, but really it's just to kind of support us as we're making decisions for each child. And I think it's important to also note that the interventions are not done as a whole group. Not an entire class. An entire class doesn't need the intervention. So we're looking at a small group of students, or potentially it could be one-on-one. It just depends on what the needs are of students at that time.
Thank you for that. I think you said it perfectly. You said the whole child. And I love that answer because, yeah, we're not just looking at tests and, just focus on the deficit. We're looking at the whole child. So thank you for that. The parent that asked that question earlier is asking similar question. And the question is, it looks like the parent is writing a sentence for the child and is telling the child to rewrite it. And the child actually writes it the opposite. I'm assuming opposite means like backward, maybe. Do you have any advice for that parent?
Mm-hmm. So one thing that we can do is using a small chalkboard of sorts, having your child put a smiley face in the top corner where you want your child to practice writing a letter. So start with, instead of an entire sentence, start with a letter. Start with a letter and show the student how on that chalkboard, I'm going to do it backwards, so hopefully you guys can see it better, but have that child trace down and then go across. Have that child use the edge of your chalkboard or the edge of a dry erase board. I guess we don't really use chalkboard too much, but the dry erase board to use it so that they can't flip that letter. Or if it's a letter where the student would do we'll say a D, have that child know that, for this letter, my smiley face is over here. This is where I do it. Oftentimes with some of those letters that we talk about being typical reversals, like the B, D, P, Q, those kind of letters, or W and M, having your child do some of the skywriting, again, that multisensory approach, or anything you can do to get their hands doing something. So if it's writing in sand, or it's tracing it, or if it's, I don't know, my kids used to love writing in pudding or shaving cream on a table. So those were different ways to teach it too. But any way that you can teach the individual sounds that match to a letter before turning it into sentences will be helpful. I think also if as you're teaching the letters or teaching it and it goes into a sentence and you see words that are backwards, letters that are backwards, have your student look at yours and look at theirs and see if you can find the difference and then work through it together. Another really good way to teach letters and sounds in the directions that they go is anything like sandpaper, if you can do sandpaper letters, or felt, anything again where you're really trying to get that multisensory approach. Some of the younger kiddos really like making letters with their bodies. Again, it's another multisensory that sometimes it just sticks a different way for every kid. So those would be some examples. And if you want to email me separately, I can send you a list of some activities that you could do with your child too, to address the writing backwards of words. I'd be happy to send some additional information.
Yes. Yes, please reach out to us or reach out to your building administrator or your teacher for additional resources, or say, hey, I heard Natalie talk about this. Can you help me with that? And they can reach out to Natalie too and send you more information. Next question that a lot of people want to know and should know is that, when we talk about dyslexia, it has that negative connotation. And like you said earlier, we want to focus on that whole child. From your experience, what do you believe is the most impactful activity or something that parents should focus on to build a child's confidence? Because we know when a child struggles with reading or writing, the confidence is going to go lower and lower and lower. So they're not going to take a risk. So outside school, what do you recommend parents to focus on so we can continuously build confidence and, look at that whole child? What advice do you have from experience or from families or students that you work with?
So one thing that I would say is celebrate the successes. So if you have a student, a lot of times they're going to see the negatives in everything that they do, or they're going to pull out the negatives, even though there may be 10 wonderful things they've done and they have 2 mistakes. A lot of times that's where their focus goes. And sometimes that's all they can focus on is the negative. So if you're able to, in anything they're doing, whether it's something academic or not academic, focus on the successes of what they're doing, and then sprinkle in a little bit of tips or strategies to help your child. So in one example, just being that if I'm working with a student who's writing and they have a slew of errors, I'm going to pick just one to focus on for that lesson with them. I'm going to pick one area that we're going to work on. Maybe it's going to be that we're working on spacing, or maybe it's that we're working on letter size. Maybe we're working on reversing the letter S every time. So I'm going to pick one skill, and I'm not going to point out all the other things that we need to work on. Let's focus on one area that is a weakness. And then the next time, celebrate when that child's done that correctly, or reinforce it again. But pick something small and then build upon that. If we're pointing out all of the negatives and all of the weaknesses, that's all they're going to see. Mm-hmm. But that positive reinforcement, the positive and encouraging environment really is going to help build the confidence of our students. And I think that's just a good life lesson, period, whether it's sports or anything, but just pick something to work on. I know for me, one of the things I always say is tell me something you notice that you did really well on. What is something that you feel you need to work on? And I do that with my reading groups. I do that in writing, and give them the opportunity to find their own successes. If you have multiple kids, or I know as if there's teachers listening, something I'll do with my groups, I'll have them pick their own goal that they're working on, but then I'll also have throughout the lesson, only have the other children say positives that they notice about the other student. So in my reading group, I may say, I know that you're really working on this, but child A, can you tell me something that this child just did really good? You really noticed? I get so excited to celebrate the other child's successes. And I will hear one student in particular, she'll say, I knew you were working on that last week. You got it this time. And just to see that they're looking for the positives in others and seeing the confidence that they're giving others, I think is helpful too. So point out successes, have your children find successes and things that your other children do well, I think is one of the most important things we can do for our kids.
I agree. We got about 5 minutes left, so go ahead and send more questions if you need to. And I want to add to what you said. Yeah, I think setting kids up for success, building confidence. From my experience, one of the most common things parents do or have told me they've done that work for their child is getting them involved in extracurricular activities. That could be anything that they're good at. It could be sports, like Natalie said. They could be in a band. They could be in a drama club. They could be an art club. They can be on all these activities that are out there at school or outside school that get them involved. Because once you get them involved, and when they feel successful at whatever that extracurricular activity is, that builds confidence. Then they can say, you know what? I might be struggling here, but I'm doing well here. And eventually the brain is going to start connecting the dots, and it's going to help kids. So that's, a lot of parents have told me that. So get kids involved in extracurricular activities. So we have about 5 more minutes, and to see if we have any more questions. As of right now, we do not. Are there anything, Natalie, that you want to quickly share? As I know you're a parent, I know this could be a little bit challenging for some parents. Sometimes you feel like, I'm a parent also. Maybe a parent, you feel like you fail somewhere. You feel like, what did I do wrong? And what can I do differently? Or do I need to, sometimes parents say, do I need to switch school? Do I need to put my child in a different school, or private school, or homeschool? And there's a lot of things that parents talk about and talk to other people too. But from a parent perspective now, what is your advice if a parent has a child that potentially might have dyslexia, or maybe is being screened for dyslexia, or still struggles with dyslexia?
Well, first, I'd say kudos to you for learning more and wanting to know more. I think that's one of the first steps, is learning more about where you're seeing weaknesses in your child. There's nothing you're doing wrong. And I think I've had a dime for every time I've heard somebody say, I wish there was a parenting manual. There's not. We all make mistakes. We all fail at certain things. But the only way that we can get better and support our own children, as well as students that we work with, but in particular our own kids, is to provide that learning environment. Reach out, find more, get more information and learn about dyslexia, learn about areas where you can support, reach out to your teachers, find out, okay, that my child's struggling with this. What are some different things I can do? You being here tonight and gathering this information is super important, and the first step, I feel like. And second of all, remembering this wasn't something you created. And just as the video showed us, like, this is part of their brain. So let's intervene. Let's put in some systematic approaches. Let's be explicit. Let's be direct. Let's focus in and hope to redirect some of those challenges that they have, building up their confidence and their self-esteem to hopefully help carry them through as they learn strategies to, in some situations, cope with it, and in some situations, be able to address it and reroute it.
Awesome. And I'd like to add to that. I think you said it perfectly, and I agree with you. And I like to say that when you talked about their brain, I think kids' brain, and all of us as human beings, our brains are wired differently. Everybody has different wiring in the brain. Obviously, it's not real wiring, but that's how we like to say it that way. And they're wired differently, and they learn differently. So the way we teach it sometimes just doesn't work for some kids. So it does not mean, they're just never going to learn it, or they're dyslexic and they're going to be like that forever. We need to look at it from the other side. We need to say, maybe the way we're teaching it is not working. Let's try something different. So let's not just, say, oh my God, my child just must have the severe disability. Let me get him evaluated or her evaluated, and let me get the answer there. A lot of times there's no answer there. We just need to start asking that questions, like Natalie said, ask questions, after questions, ask teachers, ask people outside school, because again, it's just the way the brain is wired. We need to be teaching them differently. We need to approach it differently instead of just looking for a quick solution. Sometimes there is no quick solution. So thank you for mentioning that. It is almost 7:30. Do you have any last comment you want to make, Natalie, before we wrap it up?
I'm excited that I have had the opportunity tonight to be able to share this information. I know when it was created back in 2018 and legislature mandated that we start this, there wasn't a lot of direction and a lot of guidance. It was kind of like, here's what we're going to be doing with the state of Indiana. And this year in particular, we've really been able to develop more so what that looks like and structure it. Next year, even more so, it'll be structured even further. But I'm excited that we're able to start reaching these kiddos and help to fill in some of those gaps that they may have so that they are not struggling in the long run. So I appreciate everybody being here. I appreciate all the questions.
Yeah.
Please feel free to reach out to me. And if I don't have the answer, I have a plethora of people that I am able to reach out to get that information or the answers I need. So
Yeah. Well,
thank you very, very much for being here tonight.
Oh, thank you, Natalie. One last question. I think I can answer this one. The parents asking, what can I do to get my child to enjoy reading because he does not like it all? I can tell you that's a great question. The best thing you can do is find something that child enjoys. It could be YouTube video, and you could put a caption on it and then have him follow that. Or it could be like, cartoons, and you can get, my daughter doesn't like to read, but she loves cartoons. So I got her a whole book like this thick, and it's all like, captioned, and it's all like, bubbles. It's like cartoonish. And I had her read that. So whatever they enjoy, get that for them. It could be a magazine, believe it or not. If they have a favorite athlete, get that magazine and just have them read that. So whatever they enjoy, and then you can put text on it, or there are text, I would just push that, and they'll eventually, start enjoying reading. Well, thank you so much, Natalie. Thank you so much for all of you for attending this webinar. This webinar will be available. We will record it, and we will put it on our district website. And if you need it, please feel free to contact us. As soon as we clean some of the introduction and the video, we will go ahead and post this. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening. Thank you so much, Natalie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.